Hi again, it's Ash. I hope you're having a good day so far. In my last video, I touched on this feeling of what I called autistic overwhelm, and it really shocked me that that video did really well, and a lot of you related to it and commented and left some really nice comments for me to read. A lot of you found what I was talking about relatable, and I just want to say I really appreciate it. I found your comments really encouraging and really motivating, so I'm excited to keep making videos and hopefully you enjoy them. A few of you asked if I could go into detail about how I'm personally making changes in my life to battle overwhelm, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I by no means have found like a cure or like a catch-all solution, but there are lots of little things that I do that I definitely think are helping. And as part of that, I want to talk about something which I think definitely contributes to that feeling of overwhelm, which is what I would call the autistic urge to collect. So I want to talk about that, what that is, how that affects me personally. I want to talk about the relationship that we have with our possessions, and then we'll go through how I personally am dealing with overwhelm, or at least trying to, and the steps that I'm doing and the things that I'm putting in place to help me. So let's start with something that contributes to this problem. Hi, I'm autistic and I'm overwhelmed, but I can't stop collecting things. My autism was diagnosed later in life at the age of 23, and that's a story for another video, but it was after my diagnosis that I started to realize the association between my overwhelm and my inability to let things go. According to the National Autistic Society, autistic people might become attached to objects or parts of objects such as toys, figurines, or model cars, or more unusual objects like milk bottle tops, stones, or shoes. And interest in collecting is also quite common. We're also more likely to personify objects, which makes getting rid of things harder. It's also common for autistic people to have a comfort item or many comfort items that can bring them a sense of ease when they're feeling overwhelmed. So it can be kind of paradoxical to get rid of these items that cause overwhelm when they actually comfort you and ease overwhelm. So as an autistic person, we can often have really complex and varied relationships with our possessions. The autistic urge to collect can also be associated with special interests. Oftentimes, if an autistic person has a special interest, they will want to collect things to do with that interest. This is a really big thing for me. One of the main ways that I engage with my special interests is by collecting things to do with them. I think one of the first really big ones that this happened with was the movie Big Hero 6. It was my special interest from the age of 16. I think I was 16 when the movie came out. And it was a big comfort media for me. I would watch it over and over and over again. Very autistic thing to do. And it was my special interest, and because of that, one of the ways that I engaged with it was collecting things. Baymax became like a comfort character to me, and therefore Baymax memorabilia and Big Hero 6 memorabilia became comforting items to me. I have way too many Baymax plushies. I think I have like 3 of all different sizes. I have this one that I got from Disneyland in Florida that I don't think you can get anymore. Like I've researched this. I can't find it anywhere online. And then later, I think my late teens, Steven Universe was a special interest of mine. Still kind of is, to be honest. Kind of difficult now that the show has ended. But again, I collected a lot of things to do with that show. I think it's very common to collect in that way when you have a special interest. I think it's also kind of led on by like this era of consumerism that we're in, when a piece of media, especially media, if your special interest is a piece of media, there is going to be an exorbitant amount of merch for it. But even if your special interest is a little more niche, it can still lead to that collecting urge. But the urge to collect, for me at least, isn't just physical items. As autistic people, we are, I'd say, almost absurdly curious when it comes to information, and this is something that is commonly talked about in autistic spaces, this need to collect physical items, but also information at the same time. I've talked about commonplacing on this channel before, and that is essentially collecting information in one space, in one notebook. When I say it's an autistic urge to collect, I really do mean it is an urge. It is like an intrinsic part of autism, at least for a lot of us. So collecting and personifying items and objects is an autistic trait, but predisposition to overwhelm from cluttered and overstimulating environments is also an autistic trait. So you can start to see the issue here that we run into. So how do we as autistic people reconcile the urge to collect, which brings us comfort and joy, with the need to control our environments in order to avoid overwhelm? Especially in our homes, which are meant to be a place of comfort and safety, especially as an autistic person when the outside world can feel so overstimulating. Personally, I started to realize just how much stuff I have after uni. After uni, I came home. I'd been living with my partner Kieran, but I came home to live with my parents for about a year, and I'd brought all my stuff from uni back, and then I had the stuff that I'd left at my parents' house, and I had like pieces of furniture that Kira and I had in our place, and it was all in one room in my parents' house, and I was just suddenly confronted with just how much there was. And I'm a person who likes things. I like objects. I feel like I have an obsession with objects because objects seem more permanent than experiences do. So it feels to me, or at least in my mind, that like if an object makes me happy and an object is permanent, then the happiness it gives me should be permanent too, right? But that's not how it works. And as I realized how much stuff I had, I realized that the happiness each possession gave me is often temporary. It's not always. There are some things that I have had almost my entire life and still make me as happy as they did the day I got them. But a lot of stuff, the happiness is temporary, and that stuff that no longer brought me joy is just contributing to the constant feeling of overwhelm that I was feeling. And it's when I made that connection in my brain that I started to feel more comfortable with getting rid of it. It was around this time that I read Walden, which is a book by Henry David Thoreau. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but it's a really great book. I completely recommend it. Basically, he was this guy who lived in America, and he decided to take himself out of traditional society. Essentially, he built his own house. It's more like a shed really, but a house on the side of a lake, and he lived there, and he planted potatoes in the forest and foraged and hunted and did a lot of meditation work, I guess you could call it. Not in the traditional sense of meditation, but just pondering life. I don't think I described that book very well, but it's really, really great, and there's a lot of great observations in there about modern life and the way that we tie ourselves down to our possessions. We don't necessarily connect with nature anymore, and this was written in a time that we wouldn't even really consider modern life, if you know what I mean. There's a great quote in Walden when he's talking about, he lived nearby this small town, and when one of the members of this town died, instead of all of his possessions being, he talked about purifying destruction like a bonfire or something like that, instead of getting rid of it in that way, there was an auction of his possessions, and therefore it felt like an increasing effect on his possessions. The neighbours eagerly collected to view them, bought them all, and carefully transported them to their garrets and dust holes to lie there till their estates are settled, when they will start again. I found that idea so interesting, of like, we go throughout our lives collecting our little possessions and our treasures, and we hoard them in our homes, and then when we die, they're just redistributed again to different places and to different homes. And that's not saying that there's no value in having them. It is an interesting thought of, what is the point of me holding on to this thing? He talked about it like everything that you own is tying you down. You have to lug it through life with you. And if there isn't a value in something, why are you still lugging it around? Now, I still think there is value to owning things simply for the enjoyment of them. But I think the issue comes, and is really especially common with autistic folk, when you can't or don't get rid of the item that no longer brings you that joy. And speaking of joy that an item can bring you, it was around this time that I became familiar with Marie Kondo. If you know her, probably from her Netflix series. I also read her books at this time. I have both of them. They're really, really good. I recommend them. Essentially, her philosophy, I guess, is decluttering through deciding what sparks joy for you. And that's kind of the main takeaway. There's a lot of other stuff in there, like she goes through the best ways to organize, and there's a specific order in which you should do so. I've tried that method, it works, but I think sustainably you can't keep doing it like that every day. But I do think there is value in deciding what brings you happiness and keeping that. It's not necessarily the only thing you should consider though. There is a great quote by William Morris. He says you should have nothing in your home that you don't know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. Essentially, if something isn't useful to you, or you don't like it, you don't have joy from it, you don't need it. So I've been trying over the past few years to use this idea of joy and utility to help me declutter. And it was really hard to start with, especially as an autistic person. I just find it difficult to let go of things. But I found that the more I did, the easier it was. And the lighter I felt. My space started to seem less cluttered, and that helped me feel less overwhelmed. And I like the idea of choosing what brings you joy, because as an autistic person, that means if you have things that are related to your special interest and they still bring you a lot of happiness and enjoyment in your everyday life, you can keep them. You don't need to get rid of them just because you have a lot of it. There's no need to do that. Within this model, you can keep those things. Just because we have this urge to collect, and that can sometimes lead to overwhelm, that doesn't mean that you need to get rid of your collections. It just means that I think we need to spend more time actively evaluating the things we own to decide if they're still bringing happiness to us. Personally, I found when I started decluttering that there were some items where I'm like, I like this, I love this, it does make me happy, but I still got rid of it, and I found that the joy that the item gave me was outweighed by the amount of relief I felt at owning less things. And that's not always going to happen, but it's definitely something to think about. I'm like, yes, this thing makes me happy, but if I take it away and I look at my space now, it feels less overwhelming. It feels less cluttered. I don't feel overstimulated. It's better for me. And that is a choice that I sometimes have to make, and I think it's important to think about that. I'm also learning that there are other ways to interact with my special interests other than just going out and buying everything related to it. Don't get me wrong, that is a completely valid way, and if you don't have this issue of getting overstimulated by your home and by your surroundings and by your things, go crazy. By all means, go crazy. But for me, I'm learning that keeping the amount of things I own lower, and don't get me wrong, I still own a lot of things, is much more helpful to me. And getting rid of stuff doesn't have to mean throwing it away. In fact, I actively discourage you from just throwing stuff away. Personally, I've been selling things on Vinted, which means I get some money back, which is great. There's no seller's fees on there. I'm not sponsored by Vinted, but I really like that app. It's really been useful for me. I've been selling things at car boot fairs, and then things that are of lower value or won't sell, or I just don't have the time to sell, I've been donating to local charity shops. I'm still in the process of trying to distill the number of items in my life down to a place where I don't feel overwhelmed. It's definitely a work in progress for me. I still have a huge pile in the corner of our office that's just stuff I've listed online places to sell, and I'm just waiting for it to sell. And that does make me feel a little overwhelmed. But despite all of my decluttering and going through this process, the feeling of overwhelm still persists with me. And I think that's because autistic overwhelm is twofold. It's not just about the physical clutter and the overstimulation of our environment, but it's about the mental clutter too. The internet, a truly miraculous and torturous invention. As an autistic person, the internet can really be a lifeline. We have all of the world's information at our fingertips. But unfortunately, we have all of the world's information at our fingertips. Our digital lives and the amount of information we expose ourselves to on a daily basis has a big part to play when it comes to autistic overwhelm. It's extremely common to experience mental overstimulation just from absorbing too much information. Far too often, I've found myself in an overwhelm-induced shutdown because I've spent like 5 hours on my phone, and the sheer amount of information that I've seen in that time is just overwhelming. Especially in our current attention economy and with the rise of short-form content, the amount of information that we engage with on a daily basis is getting ever higher and higher. This in itself can be overwhelming, but I think the autistic urge to collect can easily translate into amassing a huge amount of digital bookmarks, having too many tabs open, saving things to look at later. There's this one meme that I love. I think I've shared it on this channel before, but I'll put it up. It's, look, she's afraid of losing, my pronouns are he, they, but for the sake of the meme. Look, she's afraid of losing ideas, so she screenshots and bookmarks everything, but now those archives feel overwhelming, so she never looks at them. Yeah, I think that summarizes it pretty well. I actually read a book a few years ago called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. He's got a great series of books on all kinds of things. Deep Work is a great one. Digital Minimalism is really good for this particular topic, so I highly recommend looking at his books. But as I was researching into digital minimalism, I found a subreddit, and there is a lot of people on there who are experiencing this. In particular, there's one post where someone says, "My worst anxiety is never ever being able to actually clear everything I marked down on the internet as to see it later." And I think that's a pothole then that a lot of autistic people can fall into when it comes to our digital lives. That urge to collect can so easily translate to, there is so much information on the internet, I can consume all of it, I can mark it down to look at it later, but then it can easily become overwhelming. Personally, I've run into this so many times. I'm still trying to work out how to combat this. I am the kind of person that has, at least currently, I think I have 3 windows open on my internet browser on my computer, and at least one of them has like 30 tabs open. I think a good example of this that I can think of is my personal experience with Twitter, and I will be calling it Twitter. Not X, I'm not doing that. I used to have a Twitter account, and Twitter is great if you're an artist like me. There's a lot of great artists on there. It's not a lot of text, a lot of images. That's great for art. I used to use Twitter to find inspirational artists and save inspiration and see what people are talking about. And on Twitter there is, or at least when I was using it, I don't know if there still is, probably. On Twitter there is a bookmarks tab. And I used to use that so much. And then I also used to DM myself tweets from time to time. And it got to the point where there was so many in my bookmarks that I couldn't feasibly look at them all. I'm surrounded myself with so much inspiration that I couldn't actually use any of it. When the Twitter buyout happened and Elon Musk kind of started ruining the platform, I decided to step away from Twitter for a time, and after about 6 months I realized I don't really need this platform anymore. So I went through my bookmarks and I deleted them, or I saved the images using the Pinterest extension on Chrome so that I could keep them on my Pinterest boards, but still with the credit link. And then I deleted my Twitter, and that archive of bookmarks and DMs was either sorted somewhere I could actually see it, or gone. And the relief I felt after that was insane. And I've started doing that with a lot of different places in my digital life. I often use my sketchbook as a place to work out and work through my feelings. And on one particular day, on one particular page, I wrote, "Consuming is easy, creating is hard." And I stand by that. It's way too easy to spend your time consuming and filling your brain with more inspiration and more information and more ideas. But actually getting ideas out of you onto paper is so much more cathartic and so much more productive. I saw a quote that said, "Creative contribution is the direct one-to-one replacement for chronic consumption." And I think that's a great idea to think about when you're feeling overwhelmed, especially digitally and online, is to step away from consuming and to try creating something instead. Even if you're not a creative or an artist, there is still something you can do. If it's doodling, journaling, writing, even making something physically, like baking something, making a meal for your family, you can create. So that's my little thing on social media and digital lives. But when it comes to the information itself, what do you do when you've got to this point where you just have so many bookmarks, so much information swirling around in your brain and you don't know what to do with it? I have such a huge issue with this. I can't stop collecting information. I have my commonplace book, which I've talked about. I have my Hobonichi journal. I have way too many notes pages on my phone. I have Notion with many, many pages and subpages. I have different notebooks for different things. I have screenshots on my camera roll. I have bookmarks on it, pretty much every social media app that I have. I have my very carefully curated Pinterest, which I love. I have post-it notes that I write myself, and it just feels extremely overwhelming. Personally, I've spent a lot of time in, I'd say the past 2 years, simplifying my systems as much as I can. I did a video a couple of months ago on simplifying my journal system down from 3 books and a rings down to 1 book. And the same goes for digital life. I've been getting rid of things, so I no longer have notes pages on my phone. The only notes page I have is a food shopping list that once a week my partner and I go through, and I untick what we need, tick it when we buy it. That's it. I no longer keep screenshots on my phone around once a week. I go through, and if I've screenshot something to look at it later, I then file it away. I do something with that information. And I think that's like the number one thing I can recommend, is if you're like me and you have this urge to collect, and then you have these big archives of stuff, actually do something with the information. File it away, find a system that works for you. But if you sit on that pile and let it grow, it's going to overwhelm you. I've already spoken about this a little bit, but personally I find my phone and social media to be very overwhelming. It's kind of hard to admit that, because I think the dopamine that you get from social media feels so good and it feels like it's benefiting you. But I think if we really think about it, I think we all know deep down that it isn't really that good for us. Don't get me wrong, I still use social media, but I'm really trying to cut down, especially with things like TikTok. That can be such a time suck, such an attention suck, and also just feels so overwhelming with the amount of information and visual stimuli that you can see in such a short space of time. So I'm trying to spend less time on my phone. And the way I've set that up for myself is that I've deleted a lot of apps from my phone, just to the essentials that I need. And then things like social media, I'm keeping on my iPad. I use my iPad to draw and to run my art business. So I basically put all my social media on here as well, so that it feels less like I'm just picking up my phone and doing it to distract myself or to procrastinate, but because I'm going on here with a purpose. It also helps that the iPad isn't really handheld. I can't just carry it around with me all day. Another tip is to manage your notifications. I think there's actually something called notification fatigue, where if you just have too many, you won't actually notice them. Or do anything about them when they pop up. So now every time a notification pops up for me, I just quickly decide, is there something that I need to be notified about? Does it actually prompt me to do anything? And if no, then I turn it off. The only things I really receive notifications about now are emails and texts. That's pretty much it. Speaking of emails, if you're like me, you find emails very overwhelming. If I have more than 2 unopened emails, I get stressed. What I've started doing is setting some time at the beginning or the end of the day to go through my emails. I also actively unsubscribe from things as they come up, because I don't need all those marketing emails. You don't need them. When it comes to planning and to-do lists, I have one calendar that is in my journal, and that's where everything goes. My habit tracking for the month is at the side. That's it. And then when it comes to to-do lists, I have one big to-do list that you can see on the board behind me. That's like just life things that pop up that I need to do. They don't really have a like a set time limit I can do them whenever. Yeah, so when they pop up, I write them on that list. And then on my Notion, I have a little weeks thing. I know that seems weird to have a calendar in my journal and then my weeks planned out on my Notion, but it works for me. I also have a system for my camera roll as well. So like I said, I sort through my screenshots, but my actual pictures, I have OneDrive. So if you have a Microsoft account, it should come with OneDrive. And I have the app on my phone, so my photos automatically upload and are sorted by month, so I don't have to think about it. And then every now and then I'll go through my camera roll and delete 50 pictures or so that I can just stay on top of it. I think the thing as an autistic person is that a lot of the time we feel overwhelmed just by the idea of trying to do something about our overwhelm, especially if you haven't thought about doing this before, either digital decluttering or physical decluttering. It can feel overwhelming, but I found that as soon as you start to feel better. Even just one thing a day will help. I'm still refining my systems and working out what works for me. I'm definitely in a much better place than I was though, and I'm really happy about it. I wouldn't say I'm entirely there yet, but I can start to see it take shape in a way that I'm comfortable with. So I'm excited to keep going. And if you have any tips, or if you want to talk about your systems for managing overwhelm, I would really love to hear it. I'm going to put some resources and links around this topic in the description if you want to look, just some things that have helped me personally. And if you have any of your own that you'd like to share, I'd really love to see it in the comments. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there was something useful there for you. I'm really enjoying these like chatty, rambly videos. They're quite fun for me. They're quite cathartic in a way too, to talk about things. So if you liked it, please leave a comment. If you have any tips that I haven't touched on, or an experience that is different to mine, please say something in the comments. I'd love to start a discussion about it. My next few videos are going to be mainly art related. I've been feeling in a better mood mentally at the minute, so I want to try and use that to make some more art. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Okay, I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.